Thank you very much. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't have any questions. I just want to, say that I really appreciate that these bills went through the committee process. There was input, and I thank Chairman Joyce and Chairman Diaz-Balart for being here. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
First, I want to take umbrage with a slight that my colleague on the other side of the aisle made toward my profession. He said this was engineered, that the situation that we're in. I would say it's anything but engineered. And the engineered solution would in fact be 12 appropriations bills. And I think that's what we're here doing today. A shutdown is not something you engineer. And so I applaud the gentleman here for bringing an appropriations bill in front of us for the Rules Committee and the people who've worked to get to this solution. And I look forward to voting on all of the amendments. We're going to have a robust debate. It's going to be accelerated, but it'll be thorough, and there's going to be a lot of amendments. I know the chairman think they've produced the perfect product, and it needs no amendments whatsoever. But I'm sure we'll have several, and several of them will be Democratic amendments. The other thing is there is a way to avoid this situation. So the 12 separate bills is the engineering solution, but even engineers acknowledge there are humans involved, and so you have to have contingencies. And when you run out of time, sometimes because there were things you didn't anticipate or disagreements, sometimes you end up needing a little more time. And if my solution for next year, I proposed this a year ago, and we didn't do it, but I'll propose it again now while we're in the heat of the moment, is that on January 3rd, after we set our rules and elect a speaker, of course we won't do that on this next January 3rd, but it's the first day we're in business the next year, we should say when we get to September 30th, if we haven't done our homework, let's automatically have a CR kick in. Now, I would do it at 99%. It shouldn't be something we want to do a CR. There shouldn't be an incentive not to do the good work that you all have done. There should be a little bit of a disincentive to have a CR, so that's why I proposed 99%. But had we done that in January, we'd all be calmly talking about these bills that you're presenting, knowing that there is a parachute on the plane. So that's the engineering solution, but I applaud you all for bringing these bills forward, and for folks in the GOP conference who have found a way for all of us to work toward getting this done. And I don't have any questions for you, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. My good friend, gentleman from South Carolina, is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I agree with one thing from the other side. We should have had these done by now. We should have. It should have been done, as Thomas says, early in the year. Now, my solution would be, and I think the good thing about what we're doing here now, I think you're going to see these out a lot quicker than the final days next year. The only caveat I would add, Thomas, is if they're not, then we get every salary of 535 members gets cut 10% a day. Let's see how fast we get these appropriations out. Now, some of the statements that have been said that really shocked me, it's where our walls don't work. I think the doors to this facility with locks work, keeping people out. I think the doors to our houses keep people out. And I would add, the wall is paid for. I've been to the border. The steel is on the ground. So that's, to me, makes common sense. Secondly, concerned about the Border Patrol agents. This administration has handcuffed the Border Patrol agents. Go talk to them. I did, actually, after when COVID was hitting, they were concerned about babysitting then. That's unacceptable. Now, what's even more unacceptable is you see the government cutting the wires, the lines, to prevent the illegals from coming across. And what's more absurd, And I cannot believe y'all would not put up a fight over this administration giving Social Security numbers to illegals. Not only is that unconstitutional, that's not fair to the American people. Now, the good news, y'all are getting so much heat among your own members. When your own members get booed in New York City, you're going to see it getting strong. The boos are getting more stronger and louder because of what's happening. We're in a national security crisis right now. I just want to thank each of you for your work that you've done on this. It's un-American what has happened that was not here 3.5 years ago. It's all the responsibility of the administration for the press secretary to dodge questions on this, and to say that anything else is other people are to blame. It's like blaming Putin for the gas prices going up. It is absolutely absurd. One thing, which one of you said there was some payments cut to China out of this? Mario, did you say that?
Yes, sir. So one of the things that to me was very shocking. So we have, as I mentioned, sir, we've looked at every penny, every dollar, and we've scrubbed everything we can. And what we found is that sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly, U.S. taxpayer money spent abroad. And I mentioned, for example, one case of money, for example, from international lending institutions going to countries. Those countries then used that money to pay back loans to China. And so, needless to say, sir, heck no. Heck no. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think we should be spending anything, anywhere, that goes to China, the Communist Party of China, including, by the way, in a secondary fashion through things like that. And as I mentioned, the part that I was respectfully shocked about, which I've submitted for the record here, is that in the press release, and as I mentioned, by the leadership of the committee, Democratic leadership, who I have great respect for, of the committee, they actually, they did a press release criticizing the bill. That's expected. And so they only picked out a few items, right? They can't pick everything. And among the things that they chose to highlight that they are objecting to is when we cut funds, as I mentioned, either to the Communist Party of China, to China, but then also to institutions affiliated with, as I mentioned, those countries, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela. And that's why I said respectfully, sir, because I obviously, in front of this august committee, that's in the category of you can't make this stuff up.
You really can't. We need to highlight statements like you just made to the American people. That is, it's unfathomable that they would do that. The other thing, the dollars you allocated for deportation, which the next administration is going to do, assuming we get out of this horror show, is the only way to right the wrong. And so thank you for your work on it, and I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. My good friend from Texas, Mr. Roy, is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate y'all being here and for the work as my friend from Kentucky pointed out in getting these bills produced. I will echo the sentiment that I wish we were doing this in June or July. I think we should have been in here, and I think we should have stayed here in August. But we're here, and hopefully we can do our work this week and get where we need to go for the betterment of the people that we represent. My friend from Florida, a quick question. Our colleague from Colorado was inquiring about cuts to our engagement in Africa, and one of the points is about China's engagement there. Would the gentleman agree that China's engagement worldwide has not necessarily resulted in the highest quality products? In fact, the Wall Street Journal recently had an expose and a report of the extent to which their projects are falling apart. They're, in the words of the Wall Street Journal, their Belt and Road infrastructure projects are plagued with construction flaws and so forth. In other words, a race to beat China for beating China's sake in their engagement abroad does not necessarily mean that we need to appropriate dollars to dump into projects to do that. Rather, we should just do our work at the right level with the right quality and do our thing, and then essentially kind of let China hang itself there a little bit. You follow me? That's something I read in the journal just recently.
No, actually, that is the experience a lot of countries have with China because, they go in not to be helpful. They go in to not even, make a profit. They go in there to raid and to just pull out. So you're absolutely right. And which is why this bill emphasizes standing up to China. One thing that I did not mention, for example, we require the Secretary of State to counter China's treatment in international organizations as a quote-unquote developing nation. It's about time we start taking, let's take China seriously. It's also about time that we don't continue to just send money just because we've always done it. It's not only, by the way, sir, that we are, for example, eliminating funds for institutions that are ineffective, but doing so is not only helping our bottom line, it's actually helping our national security interests. Because in some cases, we're actually funding groups, institutions that are not only not helping us, they're actually hurting our national security interests. So I just could not agree with you more on what you've just mentioned about China. And by the way, as you know, sir, China not only does that as far as bad products, et cetera, but they also bribe. And they bribe heads of state. They around the entire world. I'm assuming they've never bribed any high people here in this country, but they bribe heads of state, family members of heads of state, of high-level folks. That's how they do business. And so we got to take China seriously. This bill does it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Bribery with, gold plates or gold bars with certain numbers stamped in them, for example. Let me ask another question on some of these matters. The kinds of things that your work has resulted in reducing funding to or eliminating funding to, right? Some of the things like the United Nations Population Fund, right, which feeds into China's horrific policies involving abortion and sterilization. For example, the United Nations Human Rights Council. I don't have the list in front of me. I could probably pull it up, but they have such august representatives as Cuba, China itself, Sudan, Eritrea, Algeria. The kinds of things that the kinds of places that are maybe not necessarily known for their track record with respect to human rights. And so reducing funding to these organizations, just to put it in stark comparison for the American people watching this, the current regime, the current White House, the current Democrat majority in the Senate, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here would prefer to continue to fund at not even just these levels, but higher levels, these organizations, these entities worldwide. For example, the World Health Organization, notwithstanding what we just saw unfold with respect to COVID. For example, I believe in this legislation, you prohibit funds going to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the EcoHealth Alliance, any gain-of-function research and labs in adversarial nations like China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, or Cuba. I suspect that the vast majority of the American people would like us to maybe not play those little reindeer games and resulting in, massive shutdowns of their economy and what we just dealt with for the last several years. Would you like to expound on some of those great successes and the work that you did in establishing the priorities that the American people would like to see with reducing their taxpayer dollars and borrowed dollars being wasted pursuing these things?
Sir, you've said it in a much more eloquent way than I could. But there are so many instances like that frankly you have to scratch your head and say, are we actually funding that? We are, which is why it is so important to move these appropriation bills forward, because otherwise we are stuck with that. Among the other things, by the way, there's another thing here which is very interesting. I know this is kind of a sacred cow, but there are no sacred cows. We are spending in every subcommittee, in every area of this government, we're spending all this taxpayer money. I would say that we're wasting all this taxpayer money on issues dealing with climate change. And so one of the things that I've got here, which is not a huge issue, it's not real money, is to make sure that we actually have a study. Because to find out all that money that's been going out, how much has that actually affected temperature? I think we kind of know the answer to that. It's not going to be much. So what we're trying to do, if I may say so in very simple terms, going back to the basics. This is national security spending. If you're an ally of the United States, as I said before, sir, we try to help you. But efficiently. If you're an enemy, an adversary, we confront you. You're not going to like this bill. And yes, I am not shy about saying that we are cutting spending, but those cuts in spending are not, oh, we're cutting spending so it's too bad because we're hurting what we want to do. No. Because of how we're doing it, we're actually increasing our effectiveness to stand up against our adversaries, to fight for our allies, and to do it the right way. I'm exceedingly proud of this bill. It's not perfect. No bill is perfect. But I will tell you, sir, and the issues that you just brought up, and if I repeat myself in the category, if you just can't make it up, yeah, to be criticized. And I'm obviously respectful because I respect my colleagues. But when I see criticism in writing that, oh my gosh, this is horrible because we're cutting funding for, the Wuhan lab, for gain of function research, for groups or institutions allied to the worst enemies of the United States, my answer to that is you better believe that we are eliminating taxpayer money going to those wasteful and, by the way, hurtful issues, because it's not just wasted money, it's also hurting our national security interests. So I apologize for going on, but you can tell I'm proud and passionate about the work that my colleagues have done on this bill.
Well, I appreciate your work in prioritizing the interests of the vast majority of the American people and having tax dollars being focused on our efforts here. There might be more we can do, but we'll have those conversations and continue those through the amendment process and through the continuation of the development of this rule. But I appreciate that, and I think it's a giant step forward, and hopefully we can take some more. To my colleague, Mr. Joyce, and to my colleague from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, turning a little bit to Homeland Security. We've talked about it significant, and I won't repeat things we've said before about the state of the border, in the extent to which I know my friend colleague deals with it from Texas in particular, but all of us now in terms of the experience that we're feeling and facing on a daily basis on what we're seeing with respect to fentanyl poisoning, what we're seeing with respect to the abuse of migrants. I know my friend from Texas, for example, is more than familiar with the dead bodies of migrants that we find on a daily basis, literally, in Texas. Just this morning, another report of, I think, a 10-year-old boy, this one might have been an adult. It was a 10-year-old boy last week who drowned, and his body was recovered in the Rio Grande. This is now a recurring daily situation. And I know my friend's district, we both have representation in and around San Antonio. We had the horrific experience last year with those 53 human beings that died in a tractor trailer in the Texas heat. This is something that we're seeing now affect our constituents directly. Loss of loved ones, whether it's the fentanyl poisonings, seeing what's happening, the sex trafficking trade, the horrific stories, as I've recounted here with respect to my friend and judge, Reed O'Connor, upward departing because of the horrific facts and a man, an illegal immigrant, but who was here in Baltimore, who paid his $1,000, and then his wife and daughter were being held for ransom unless he paid $23,000, they would get raped and abused. This is just now becoming commonplace, and as my friend said earlier, this is not Christian. This is not compassionate. And so I hope we are now, particularly with the eyes being opened with what's going on in New York and what's going on now increasingly in other cities around the country. I hope our eyes are being open to this reality, because while my friend from Colorado, and I say respectfully, was talking about how we've had all the hearings, that we've been looking at this and looking at these facts. I mean, I've been talking about this issue, for years, but in this committee since January, and there's been a whole lot of, kind of eye rolling and disagreement about the fact that this is a heightened issue and a level that needs to be addressed, that there's having actual consequences with respect to human beings and their lives and the tragedy. So having said that, the question is, what do we do about it? And I want to start with an enormous amount of applause and respect for my colleague for putting together a Homeland Security package that has riders and has important language in the bill that will take steps towards forcing this administration to do its job. And I would hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree that it should be a nonpartisan truth that we should hold the executive branch accountable. And I've said this before, and I introduced legislation that took positions when President Trump was in the White House to do that. I would hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would join us now to do that, because this secretary and this president are blatantly disregarding their duty to figure out this problem. And it is a problem that must be dealt with now. Not walking through a presidential election to set some sort of debate about what may or may not occur in January of 2025, but sitting here today, now. So I applaud that this appropriations bill takes significant steps to, for example, deal with the CBP One app that is being abused to use parole on a categorical basis to take people and process them into the United States, yielding yet another record number that we're dealing with here in August and September, well over 200 and something thousand encounters. As I know, my friend from Texas in particular knows these facts. The swelling numbers in Eagle Pass that we're seeing right now, the people in train cars and open containers coming here, the thousands mounting in the Darien Gap, people getting overrun, filling up our hospitals, our schools, law enforcement overrun in Texas. I don't know how much is too much for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to recognize how important it is to shut down the abuse of the border. And that is just a simple reality. And we're talking about shutting down the government. Well, to avoid shutting down the government, why don't we do our job to shut down a wide open border and force it into actually compliance with the law? That's the question. And that's the question that every American right now is watching. And I know that some of my Democratic colleagues are starting to recognize that reality, finally. Whether they're recognizing it enough. And to my colleague who mentioned like a seat at the table on these issues, my friend from Texas, I'm happy to talk anytime. We've done bills together, introduced legislation together. Happy to. But I'm just going to say from my position, it begins and ends with the President of the United States respecting the laws of the United States and actually enforcing the laws of the United States. And that's not happening, which gets to the crux of this that I have to ask when we talk about what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to pass language, and I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would agree, to say that the funds can only be used to carry out the law, that the funds can only be used not to dump people into the United States, for example, under a categorical parole authority or use of, as my friend from Texas referenced, asylum in such a way that is counter to the question of whether or not an individual is here because of a persecution based on religious beliefs or some other category that we've put into the law, which everyone knows was done from a faithful Christian or other faith walk perspective of humanity and compassion to give someone a door, a respite, if they're being chased and persecuted, but not as a big neon sign that says we're going to weld the gates open in Arizona and just say walk right on in. Because that's what this administration is doing, and everybody knows it. And it is not good for the migrants. It is not good for the people that we represent. So I wonder if the chairman of the subcommittee could explain a little bit more. I know you did in your opening statement about the specifics of what you were trying to accomplish with the language in the bill.